I'm Hazel, 32, and that Sunday at my in-laws' house changed everything. I walked in as my 7-year-old daughter Emma sat on the floor, holding her arm, tears streaming down her face. My heart stopped. "He's a boy," my mother-in-law Margaret said dismissively. She must have said something to provoke him. They actually made my little girl apologize to her cousin Jacob, who had just hit her. I smiled, though fury burned inside me. I picked Emma up, and we walked out without a word. 2 days later, they got a wake-up call they never expected. Before I continue the story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for your child. To understand why that moment was the breaking point, you need to know about our family dynamics. I met my husband Robert 9 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. It was one of those movie-worthy moments. He spilled his drink on my dress, apologized profusely, and then spent the entire evening making me laugh. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a beautiful summer ceremony. Robert is kind, hardworking, and a wonderful father to Emma, but he has one significant blind spot: his parents. Margaret and William have always been overly involved in our lives. They're the type of in-laws who never quite accepted that their son had formed his own family unit. At first, I tried to embrace their involvement. I thought having attentive grandparents would be beneficial for our future children. I couldn't have been more wrong. Robert has one brother, Thomas, who's 3 years older and married to Beth. They have an 8-year-old son, Jacob. From the beginning, it was clear that Thomas was the golden child in the family. His achievements were celebrated extravagantly while Robert's were merely acknowledged. This dynamic extended to the next generation. Jacob became the golden grandchild, while our Emma was treated as an afterthought. Jacob has always been a challenging child. He's loud, demanding, and prone to tantrums when he doesn't get his way. My in-laws have never seen this as problematic. "He's just spirited," Margaret would say. "He knows what he wants." Meanwhile, if Emma so much as spoke above a whisper, she was being difficult or showing off. The first time I noticed a real problem was at Emma's 4th birthday party. Jacob, then 5, wanted to open Emma's presents. When told he couldn't, he pushed Emma into her cake. Instead of disciplining Jacob, my in-laws laughed and called it just kids being kids. Robert brushed it off too, saying, "They're cousins, they'll have their moments." The incidents continued. Jacob would take toys from Emma, and when she protested, she was told to share with your cousin. If Emma took something of Jacob's, however, there was immediate intervention. "That's not yours, Emma," Margaret would scold. "Jacob doesn't have to share if he doesn't want to." I brought these concerns to Robert numerous times. "Your parents are treating Emma unfairly," I'd say. His response was always some version of, "That's just how they are," or "You're being too sensitive." It created a growing tension in our marriage, with Robert caught between supporting his wife and pleasing his parents. Emma, sweet and sensitive by nature, began to dread family gatherings. She'd cling to me and ask if we could stay home. When I asked why, she'd just say, "I don't think Grandma and Grandpa like me very much." It broke my heart, but Robert insisted she was misinterpreting things. Last Christmas, the situation escalated when Jacob received a mountain of gifts, while Emma got only 2 small presents. When I mentioned the disparity, William said, "Well, boys are more expensive to shop for." I watched Emma's face fall as she tried to hide her disappointment. That night, I told Robert we needed to limit our visits, but he accused me of trying to separate him from his family. Our parenting styles differed dramatically from Thomas and Beth's approach with Jacob. We believed in setting boundaries and teaching Emma about consequences, while they seemed to let Jacob do whatever he wanted. Beth occasionally showed signs of concern about Jacob's behavior, but Thomas was quick to shut down any suggestion that their son needed guidance. Despite the tensions, we maintained regular family dinners at Margaret and William's house. Robert insisted these gatherings were important for Emma to build relationships with her extended family. I reluctantly agreed, though I made sure to stay close to Emma during these visits. The week before the incident, Jacob had pushed Emma while they were playing in the backyard. When I brought it up, Margaret said, "Emma needs to toughen up. The real world isn't going to coddle her." I noticed Robert wincing at his mother's words, but as usual, he said nothing. By the time Sunday's dinner came around, my patience with the situation was wearing thin. Little did I know this would be the day everything changed. The Sunday started like any other family gathering at my in-laws' house. Robert and I arrived with Emma around 4 in the afternoon, bringing a homemade apple pie that Margaret would inevitably criticize for not being quite right. The house smelled of pot roast and potatoes. William prided himself on his cooking, one of the few genuinely pleasant aspects of these visits. Thomas, Beth, and Jacob arrived shortly after us. Jacob immediately ran to the playroom where the adults had set up toys for the children, barely acknowledging anyone's presence. Emma hesitated before following him, looking at me with those uncertain eyes that always made my heart ache. "Go ahead, sweetie," I encouraged her. "I'll be right in the living room if you need me." The adults settled in the living room with drinks, wine for the women, beer for the men. Margaret launched into her usual interrogation about our lives, focusing particularly on Robert's work and whether he was finally going to get that promotion Thomas had received years ago at a different company. I sat quietly, nodding at appropriate intervals while keeping an ear tuned toward the playroom. About 30 minutes into our visit, Robert's phone rang. It was his boss, unusual for a Sunday, but there was an issue with a client in a different time zone that couldn't wait. He stepped onto the back porch to take the call, leaving me alone with his family. "Emma seems so quiet lately," Margaret commented as Robert left. "Is she making any friends at school?" "Jacob has so many friends, the phone never stops ringing." The comparison was typical, subtle enough that calling it out would make me seem oversensitive. Thomas chimed in, "Jacob's teacher says he's a natural leader. All the kids follow what he does." Beth nodded proudly, though I'd noticed before that she sometimes seemed uncomfortable with these conversations. William was about to add something when I heard a thud from the playroom, followed by Emma's cry. I was on my feet instantly, but William waved dismissively. "Let them sort it out. Kids need to learn to resolve their own conflicts." Something in me refused to sit back down. "I'll just check," I said, already moving toward the playroom. What I saw when I entered stopped me in my tracks. Emma was sitting on the floor, holding her arm, tears streaming down her face. Jacob stood over her, clutching a colorful toy robot that I recognized as the one I'd bought for Emma's birthday the previous month. She had brought it along today because it was her current favorite. "What happened?" I asked, rushing to Emma's side. Before Emma could answer, Margaret appeared behind me. "What's all this fuss about?" she asked. Emma looked up, her voice trembling. "Jacob wanted my robot, and I said we could take turns, but he grabbed it and pushed me." Jacob immediately countered. She wouldn't share. "And she called me stupid." I examined Emma's arm, seeing the red mark forming near her elbow. "Did you push her, Jacob?" I asked directly. "She wouldn't give me the toy," he insisted, as if this justified his actions. Margaret stepped forward. "Now, Emma, you know you're supposed to share with your cousin." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was pushed to the ground. "Margaret, she's hurt." William joined us, surveying the scene with a frown. "What's going on?" "Jacob pushed Emma and took her toy," I explained. William sighed as if I was making a mountain out of a molehill. "He's a boy, Hazel. Boys play rough sometimes." Emma must have said something to provoke him. I stared at him, incredulous. "So it's Emma's fault she was pushed?" Margaret put her hand on Jacob's shoulder protectively. "Jacob, did Emma say something mean to you?" Jacob, quickly picking up on the direction of the conversation, nodded vigorously. "She said I couldn't play with the robot because it's hers and I'd break it." "See?" Margaret said, as if this explained everything. "Emma needs to learn to be more generous." I looked at my daughter, who was still holding her arm, confusion and hurt written across her face. "Emma doesn't have to share everything, especially not with someone who hurts her. Oh, for heaven's sake, William interjected. This is how children learn. Jacob is just being a normal boy. Emma needs to toughen up a bit. Margaret nodded in agreement. Emma, I think you owe Jacob an apology for not sharing and for saying mean things. I was about to protest when Emma, ever the peacemaker, quietly said, I'm sorry, Jacob. Jacob smirked, clutching the robot tighter. The look of victory on his face made my blood boil. They're all better, Margaret said with satisfaction. Now you two play nicely. I looked at my daughter, sitting there having been forced to apologize to the very person who hurt her. Something inside me snapped. Years of watching Emma being diminished, of having her feelings invalidated, of being expected to accept mistreatment, it all culminated in this moment. I smiled, though fury burned inside me. Without a word, I picked Emma up, grabbed her small backpack, and walked toward the front door. Where are you going? Margaret called after me. Dinner's almost ready. I didn't respond. I didn't look back. I strapped Emma into her car seat, got behind the wheel, and drove away, leaving stunned silence behind us. Robert called about 10 minutes later, confused and concerned. What happened? Why did you leave? Call me when you're ready to come home, I replied calmly. We need to talk. The drive home was quiet at first. In the rearview mirror, I could see Emma looking out the window, her small face troubled. I waited until we were about halfway home before speaking. Emma, sweetie, I want you to know something very important, I said, making sure my voice was steady despite the anger still simmering inside me. What happened back there wasn't right. You don't ever have to let anyone hurt you, and you certainly don't have to apologize when someone else does something wrong. Emma's eyes met mine in the mirror. But Grandma said I had to say sorry. Grandma was wrong, I said firmly. Even adults can be wrong sometimes. No one has the right to hurt you, not even your cousin. She was quiet for a moment. Jacob does that a lot, she finally admitted. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What do you mean a lot? He pushes me or grabs things from me when the grown-ups aren't looking. Last time, he pinched me really hard and said if I told anyone, no one would believe me because everyone likes him better. My heart shattered. All this time, my daughter had been enduring mistreatment in silence. Emma, why didn't you tell me this before? Her answer was devastating in its simplicity. Daddy always says I should try harder to get along with Jacob. And Grandma and Grandpa always take his side. We arrived home, and I helped Emma get settled with a snack and her favorite cartoon while I processed what I'd learned. This wasn't just about one incident. It was a pattern of behavior that everyone had enabled, including, to my shame, myself. By continuing to expose Emma to these situations, I had failed to protect her. Robert came home about an hour later, his expression a mix of confusion and irritation. What happened? He demanded as soon as he walked through the door. My parents said you just grabbed Emma and left without explanation. I asked him to join me in the kitchen, away from Emma's ears. Jacob pushed Emma to the ground and took her toy. When she tried to explain, your parents accused her of provoking him and forced her to apologize to Jacob. Robert ran a hand through his hair. I'm sure it wasn't that bad. Kids get into scuffles all the time. Emma just told me that Jacob regularly hurts her when adults aren't looking. He's been bullying her. Robert and your parents have been enabling it. Kids will be kids, he started, but I cut him off. No. That's exactly the attitude that's allowing this to continue. Would you say kids will be kids if it was some stranger's child hurting Emma? Or is it only acceptable because it's your nephew? Robert looked taken aback. Of course, I don't want Emma to be hurt. But you know how my parents are. They've always favored Thomas and Jacob. And that makes it okay? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Your daughter is being hurt physically and emotionally, and you're worried about rocking the boat with your parents? What do you want me to do, Hazel? Cut them off? They're my family. We're your family, I countered. Emma and I are your family. And right now, your daughter needs you to stand up for her. Our argument continued for nearly an hour, with Robert alternating between defensiveness and grudging acknowledgement that something needed to change. By the end, he agreed that Jacob's behavior was problematic, but he was still resistant to confronting his parents directly. As if on cue, Robert's phone rang. It was Margaret. He put it on speaker. "Robert, your wife's behavior today was completely unacceptable," she began without preamble. "To walk out before dinner without even saying goodbye. We expect an apology." Robert looked at me, conflicted. I shook my head firmly. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "Jacob pushed Emma and took her toy. Hazel was upset that you made Emma apologize." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Margaret huffed. "Jacob is just being a normal boy. Emma needs to learn to share and not be so sensitive. You need to talk to your wife about her overreaction." After the call ended, I looked at Robert. "Do you see now? They don't even acknowledge that what Jacob did was wrong." That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open. Sleep wasn't coming, so I might as well be productive. I began researching child development and bullying behaviors, reading articles from child psychologists about the importance of teaching children to respect boundaries. I found resources about how enabling bad behavior in children can lead to more serious problems as they grow older. I called Emma's pediatrician first thing Monday morning and scheduled an appointment. Dr. Larson examined Emma's arm, noting the bruise that had formed, and asked her gentle questions about what happened. When Emma mentioned that Jacob had hurt her before, Dr. Larson gave me a concerned look. "Emma, would you like to look at some books in the waiting room for a few minutes while I talk to your mom?" she asked. Once Emma was out of earshot, Dr. Larson turned to me. "Hazel, repeated aggressive behavior like this needs to be addressed. It's not just boys being boys. It's a pattern that can cause lasting harm to both children. Jacob is learning that his actions have no consequences, while Emma is learning that her boundaries don't matter." I nodded, tears threatening. "I know. I'm trying to figure out how to handle it. Document everything," she advised. "And be clear about your boundaries. Emma needs to see that you'll protect her, even if it means making difficult decisions about family relationships." That evening, while Robert played with Emma, I sat down and started documenting every incident I could remember involving Jacob and our in-laws' dismissive responses. The list was longer than I expected, dating back to when Emma was just a toddler. I also drafted an email that I knew would change our family dynamics forever. "What are you doing?" Robert asked when he came to bed and found me still typing. "I'm taking a stand," I replied, showing him the list I'd compiled. "This has been going on for years, Robert. It stops now." He read through the incidents, his face growing increasingly troubled. I had no idea it was this bad, because every single time it was dismissed as normal or as Emma's fault. But look at the pattern. This isn't healthy for anyone, not for Emma and not even for Jacob. He's learning that he can hurt others without consequences. Robert was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" I showed him the draft email addressed to his parents, Thomas and Beth. It laid out the pattern of behavior, included educational resources about child development and bullying, and set clear boundaries for future interactions. The conditions were non-negotiable: acknowledgement of the problem, a sincere apology to Emma, and a commitment to addressing Jacob's behavior. "If they can't agree to these terms," I said quietly, "then we need to limit Emma's exposure to them. I won't keep subjecting her to an environment where she's being hurt." Robert read the email twice. I could see the internal struggle on his face, the little boy who wanted his parents' approval battling with the father who needed to protect his daughter. "Send it," he finally said. "You're right. This has gone on too long." I hit send at 1:37 a.m., knowing that the next day would bring either the beginning of healing or the deepening of divisions. Either way, things would never be the same. The email I sent to my in-laws, Thomas and Beth, was the result of hours of careful thought and research. I wanted it to be educational rather than accusatory, though I didn't shy away from the hard truths. The subject line read, "Concerning Sunday's incident and moving forward." I began by detailing what happened on Sunday, being careful to stick to the facts without emotional language. Then I listed the previous incidents Emma had experienced, dating back to when she was 3 years old. Reading it all laid out chronologically made the pattern undeniable. Emma has shared with me that Jacob regularly hurts her when adults aren't present, I wrote. She's been afraid to speak up because she's been conditioned to believe that her feelings don't matter and that no one will believe her. This is deeply concerning, not just for Emma's well-being, but for Jacob's development as well. I included links to articles from child psychologists about the importance of teaching children about consent and respecting physical boundaries. I attached a PDF about the long-term effects of childhood bullying, both on the victims and on the children who are allowed to bully others without intervention. Children who are permitted to hurt others without consequences often struggle with relationships and boundaries as they grow older, I explained. By dismissing Jacob's behavior as normal or acceptable, we're doing him a disservice. He needs guidance to develop empathy and self-control. I also attached a photo of Emma's arm, showing the bruise that had formed where Jacob had pushed her. Seeing the physical evidence made the situation impossible to minimize. Moving forward, I continued, we need to establish some guidelines for family interactions. These are non-negotiable if we want to maintain a healthy relationship between our families. 1. Acknowledgement that pushing, hitting, or otherwise physically hurting others is never acceptable, regardless of gender. 2. A sincere apology to Emma from both Jacob and the adults who dismissed her experience. 3. A commitment to addressing problematic behavior immediately when it occurs, without placing blame on the victim. 4. Agreement to attend at least one family therapy session to discuss healthy boundaries and conflict resolution. 5. Understanding that Emma will not be forced to share her belongings or to spend time alone with Jacob until trust has been rebuilt. I concluded by expressing hope that we could work together to create a healthier dynamic for all the children in the family. We love you all and want Emma to have a close relationship with her grandparents and cousin. But that relationship must be built on mutual respect and safety. I included a note from Dr. Larson about the psychological impact of forcing children to accept mistreatment. When we tell children to apologize for being hurt, we teach them that their boundaries don't matter and that speaking up against mistreatment is wrong. This can have lasting effects on their self-esteem and future relationships. Before sending the email, I showed it to Robert one more time. He read it carefully, his expression serious. "This is going to upset them," he said finally. "I know. But is there anything in here that isn't true or necessary?" He shook his head slowly. "No. It's all factual. And it needs to be said." He looked me in the eyes. "Send it. I'm with you on this." Hitting that send button felt like setting off an explosion with a delayed fuse. I knew it wouldn't be long before the fallout began. The response was swift and exactly as I'd expected. My phone started ringing at 7:22 a.m. It was Margaret. I let it go to voicemail, needing to get Emma ready for school before dealing with the situation. When I checked the message later, Margaret's voice was tight with anger. "I don't appreciate being lectured about how to handle children, Hazel. We raised 2 successful sons without all these modern parenting theories. Call me back immediately so we can discuss your ridiculous demands." William called Robert at work, trying to bypass me entirely. "Your wife is overreacting," he told Robert. "Jacob is just a normal, active boy. Emma needs to learn to stand up for herself instead of having her mother fight her battles." I was proud when Robert stood his ground. "Dad, Jacob hurt Emma. That's not acceptable, no matter how you try to justify it." The most surprising response came from Beth. She texted me directly. "Can we meet for coffee? Just the 2 of us. There's more to this situation than you know." Throughout the day, the calls and texts continued. Margaret tried various approaches: anger, guilt, appeals to family loyalty. After all we've done for you and Emma, one message read, "This is how you repay us? By attacking our parenting and threatening to keep Emma away." I maintained radio silence, giving them time to process the email fully. That evening, Robert and I sat down with Emma and had an age-appropriate conversation about boundaries. "Your body belongs to you," I told her. "No one has the right to hurt you, and you don't have to share your things if you don't want to." "Even with Jacob?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Especially with Jacob," Robert affirmed, and I felt a surge of love for my husband. "And if anyone ever hurts you or makes you feel bad, you can always tell us. We will always believe you and protect you." The relief on Emma's face broke my heart. How long had she been carrying this burden, thinking she had to accept mistreatment to please her family? The next morning, I met Beth at a quiet cafe away from both our homes. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. "I want you to know that I agree with everything in your email," she said without preamble. "Jacob's behavior has been concerning me for some time, but Thomas and his parents always shut me down when I try to address it." She revealed that Jacob had been having problems at school too. His teacher had called multiple times about aggressive behavior toward classmates. Thomas's parents always say it's the other kid's fault, or the teacher is targeting Jacob unfairly. Thomas believes them because it's easier than facing the truth. "Which is?" I prompted. "That Jacob needs help," she said simply. "He's struggling with impulse control and empathy, and instead of getting him the support he needs, everyone's pretending there's no problem." She looked down at her coffee. "I've tried to talk to his pediatrician, but Thomas always takes over the appointments and dismisses my concerns." This conversation gave me hope that at least one other adult in the family recognized the seriousness of the situation. Before we parted, Beth agreed to support our conditions and to work on getting Thomas on board as well. Later that day, Thomas called Robert, furious about the email. "Your wife is trying to turn Beth against me," he accused. "Jacob is a normal kid. Stop letting Hazel make mountains out of molehills." Robert held firm. "This isn't about taking sides, Thomas. It's about making sure both kids are safe and learning healthy ways to interact." The standoff continued through the evening, with Margaret and William rallying Thomas to their side, while Beth cautiously aligned with us. The family was fracturing along lines that had always existed beneath the surface, but had never been so explicitly exposed. That night, Robert and I were more united than we had been in years. "I should have stood up to them sooner," he admitted as we got ready for bed. "I always knew they favored Thomas and Jacob, but I told myself it wasn't that bad or that you were being too sensitive." "What changed?" I asked. "Seeing that bruise on Emma's arm," he said quietly, "and realizing that she's been hurting for years while I looked the other way." "What kind of father does that make me?" "One who's learning and growing," I said, taking his hand. "That's all any of us can do." We went to bed that night not knowing what the next day would bring. The battle lines had been drawn, but we were prepared for whatever came next. What we weren't prepared for was the phone call that came at 6:15 the next morning. It was Beth, her voice shaking. "William's in the hospital. He had chest pains last night. It's not a heart attack, just angina, but it scared everyone. He's asking to see you and Emma." William's health scare changed the dynamic in ways I couldn't have predicted. Robert and I debated whether to visit the hospital and ultimately decided that Robert would go alone first to assess the situation. Emma was still asleep, and I wasn't willing to bring her into what might be another emotionally fraught situation. "I'll go see how he is," Robert said, grabbing his keys. "If it seems appropriate, maybe you and Emma can come later." I nodded, relieved that we were on the same page. "Be careful," I warned. This could be a genuine olive branch, or it could be a manipulation tactic. Robert returned 3 hours later, his expression thoughtful. "Dad's okay," he reported. "The doctor says it was stress-induced angina. Not a heart attack, but definitely a warning sign." "How is everyone behaving?" I asked cautiously. "Subdued," he replied. "Mom was crying, of course. Thomas was pacing around like a caged animal. Beth looked exhausted. He paused. Dad asked about you and Emma. He seemed genuinely sorry you weren't there. I raised an eyebrow. Did he say that? Not in so many words, Robert admitted. But it was the first time he's ever actually asked about Emma's well-being. He wanted to know if her arm was better. This small sign of concern was unexpected. While I wasn't ready to assume it represented a real change of heart, it was at least an acknowledgement that Emma had been hurt. The hospital incident created a temporary ceasefire. No one called or texted demanding apologies or making accusations. It was as if everyone needed time to recalibrate after the shock. During this lull, I received an unexpected call from Emma's school. Mrs. Reynolds? This is Mrs. Patel, Jacob's teacher. Beth gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I was surprised but curious. Yes, of course. What can I help you with? Beth mentioned there have been some incidents between Jacob and Emma outside of school, she said carefully. I wanted you to know that we've been addressing similar behaviors here. Jacob has been having difficulty respecting other children's boundaries. She explained that they'd implemented a behavior plan for Jacob, but without support from home, progress was limited. Beth is on board with getting Jacob the help he needs, but she's mentioned that her husband and in-laws are resistant. This conversation confirmed what Beth had told me and added an important perspective. Jacob's behavior wasn't just a family issue, it was affecting his functioning at school as well. I thanked Mrs. Patel for reaching out and promised to keep her updated on our family's progress in addressing the situation. That evening, Robert received a text from Thomas that surprised us both. Can we talk? Just us brothers. No wives. Robert looked at me questioningly. Should I go? I considered for a moment. Yes, but be clear about where you stand. This isn't about taking sides against spouses, it's about doing what's right for the kids. Robert met Thomas at a bar near Thomas's office. When he returned, his expression was a mix of weariness and cautious optimism. He's scared, Robert reported. Dad's health scare made him realize how fragile everything is. And Jacob's teacher called him in for a conference yesterday. She showed him documentation of multiple incidents where Jacob hurt other kids. He can't deny it anymore. How did he react? I asked. Defensive at first. Blamed the school, the other kids, Beth for coddling Jacob. But eventually, he admitted he's worried about his son. Robert sighed. He asked me what we're doing with Emma that makes her so well-behaved. That's the first time he's ever acknowledged that Emma is doing well, not just too sensitive or too quiet. This was another small but significant shift. The family dynamics that had seemed set in stone for years were beginning to crack under the pressure of reality. The next day, Beth called me. Thomas talked to Jacob's pediatrician, she said, her voice tense with restrained excitement. We're getting a referral to a child psychologist. Thomas is actually on board. What changed his mind? I asked. Your email, Dad's health scare, the school conference, all of it together. He finally had to face that this isn't just me being overprotective. She paused. And he saw the photo of Emma's bruise. That really hit him hard, seeing physical evidence of what Jacob did. 2 days after William came home from the hospital, Margaret called me directly. I braced myself for another confrontation, but her voice was subdued. Hazel, I think we need to talk. All of us, together. Can you and Robert bring Emma over this weekend? William's feeling much better, and we have some things we need to discuss as a family. I was cautious. Margaret, I appreciate the invitation, but I need to be clear, we're not bringing Emma into a situation where she might be made to feel responsible for any of this. I understand, she said, and to my surprise, she sounded sincere. This isn't about placing blame. It's about figuring out how to move forward. After consulting with Robert, we agreed to meet at their house on Saturday afternoon, with the understanding that we would leave immediately if things became negative. We prepared Emma carefully, explaining that we were going to talk with her grandparents about making sure everyone treats each other kindly. Will Jacob be there? She asked, a flicker of anxiety crossing her face. No, sweetie, I assured her. Just Grandma, Grandpa, Uncle Thomas, and Aunt Beth. And Dad and I will be with you the whole time. When we arrived at my in-laws' house, the atmosphere was noticeably different from our usual visits. Gone was the forced joviality that typically masked the undercurrents of criticism and comparison. Instead, there was a subdued tension, the kind that comes when people know difficult conversations lie ahead. William looked pale but composed, sitting in his usual armchair. Margaret had prepared a simple spread of coffee and store-bought cookies, unusual for her, as she typically made elaborate homemade treats that she would pointedly mention had taken all day. Thomas and Beth arrived shortly after us. Beth immediately came to greet Emma with genuine warmth, while Thomas hung back, looking uncomfortable. I noticed he couldn't quite look at Emma's arm, though the bruise had mostly faded. Margaret suggested that Emma might like to watch a movie in the den while the adults talked. I was about to object when Emma spoke up. Can I stay? She asked quietly. You're going to talk about me and Jacob, right? The adults exchanged glances. It was Robert who answered. Yes, sweetie, we are. But some of it might be grown-up talk that could be boring or confusing. Emma straightened her shoulders in a gesture so adult it made my heart ache. I want to stay. I promise I'll tell you if I want to leave. Robert looked at me, and I nodded. Emma deserved to be part of this conversation about her own safety and well-being. William cleared his throat. Well, I suppose we should get started. He looked directly at Emma, something he rarely did. Emma, your grandmother and I owe you an apology. We didn't listen to you when you were hurt, and we made you apologize when you didn't do anything wrong. That wasn't fair. Emma's eyes widened at this unexpected acknowledgement. She glanced at me, and I gave her an encouraging nod. Thank you, Grandpa, she said simply. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. When your grandfather had to go to the hospital, it made us think about what's really important. And hurting people's feelings or letting someone get hurt because of old-fashioned ideas, that's not what family should be about. Thomas spoke next, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Jacob's teacher has been trying to tell us for months that there are problems. I didn't want to hear it. It was easier to think everyone else was overreacting. He looked at Emma directly for the first time. I'm sorry he hurt you, Emma. And I'm sorry I didn't do anything about it sooner. Beth reached over and squeezed Thomas's hand, her relief at his acknowledgement evident. The conversation that followed wasn't easy. There were moments of defensiveness, particularly from Margaret, who struggled to let go of her boys will be boys mindset. William occasionally lapsed into justifications about how things were done in my day. But each time, someone, Robert, me, Beth, or even Thomas, gently redirected the conversation back to the core issue, the children's well-being. By the end of the afternoon, we had established some preliminary agreements. 1. Jacob would continue seeing the child psychologist Beth had found. 2. Any playtime between Jacob and Emma would be fully supervised for the foreseeable future. 3. Everyone agreed to a family session with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. 4. The adults would work on validating Emma's feelings and respecting her boundaries. 5. Physical aggression would never be dismissed as normal or acceptable. As we prepared to leave, Emma surprised everyone by approaching William's chair. I hope you feel better, Grandpa, she said, patting his hand gently. William's eyes glistened. Thank you, Emma. I'm already feeling much better. In the car on the way home, Emma was thoughtful. Are things going to be different now? She asked. Robert and I exchanged glances. We're going to try to make them different, I said honestly. Everyone has promised to work on treating each other with more kindness and respect. Even Jacob? Jacob is learning, Robert explained. Just like you learn math or reading at school, he needs to learn how to manage his feelings without hurting others. It might take some time. Emma nodded, accepting this explanation. I'm glad Grandma and Grandpa said sorry. That was hard for them. Out of the mouths of babes. Even at 7, Emma understood something profound about human nature, how difficult it is to admit when we're wrong, and how meaningful it is when we do. That night, as Robert and I discussed the day's events, he seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. I've spent my whole life trying to please my parents, he admitted, always feeling like I was second best after Thomas. Today was the first time I felt like I was doing the right thing, not just trying to keep the peace. I squeezed his hand. You stood up for your daughter. That matters more than anything. We stood up for her, he corrected. And somehow it brought the whole family to a better place. He shook his head in wonder. Who would have thought that setting boundaries would actually bring us closer together? The road ahead would not be smooth. I harbored no illusions about that. Years of established patterns wouldn't change overnight. But for the first time, I felt genuine hope that our extended family could evolve into something healthier for all of us, especially for the children. A week after our family meeting, Margaret called to invite us to lunch at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. Just the 4 of us, she specified. You, Robert, William, and me. We'd like to talk more about moving forward. I agreed cautiously, still not entirely convinced that their change of heart was genuine or lasting. Robert was similarly skeptical but hopeful. Dad's health scare really shook them, he reminded me. Sometimes it takes something dramatic to make people reevaluate their priorities. We arranged for Emma to have a play date with her best friend from school, ensuring she wouldn't feel left out or anxious about the meeting. Before leaving, I reviewed our boundaries with Robert. We need to be united, I emphasized. No letting them minimize what happened or revert to old patterns. He nodded firmly. Agreed. This is too important to backslide on. The cafe Margaret had chosen was a neutral space, not their territory, not ours. It was a peaceful setting with well-spaced tables that offered privacy for conversation. When we arrived, Margaret and William were already seated, looking somewhat tense but composed. After ordering drinks, William took the lead, surprising me with his directness. We've been doing a lot of thinking since our meeting last week, he began. And we've realized that we've been, well, wrong about a number of things. Margaret nodded, twisting her napkin nervously. We come from a different generation, she added. When our boys were growing up, the approach to discipline and behavior was different. Boys were expected to be rough, and children were expected to work things out themselves. But that doesn't make it right, William interjected, placing his hand over Margaret's fidgeting ones. The world has changed, and frankly, maybe the old ways weren't as good as we like to remember. I glanced at Robert, seeing the surprise on his face mirroring my own. This level of self-reflection was unprecedented from his parents. Margaret continued, After you sent that email, Hazel, I was angry. I felt attacked and judged as a grandmother and as a mother. But then when William had his episode, her voice faltered. The doctor said it was stress-induced, William explained. And it made us think about what's really important. Not being right. Not maintaining some image of a perfect family. But actually being there for our family. All of our family. We've been reading some of those articles you sent, Margaret admitted. About children's development and the importance of boundaries. It's eye-opening. Thomas and Beth came over yesterday, William added. They told us that Jacob has started seeing a child psychologist. Dr. Rodriguez, I believe. Robert nodded. Beth mentioned that. How do you feel about it? There was a moment of hesitation before William answered. Initially, I thought it was an overreaction. In my day, children didn't need therapists unless something was seriously wrong. He sighed. But Jacob had another incident at school. He pushed a little girl who wouldn't let him use the computer during free time. The school called Thomas in for a conference. That must have been difficult for everyone, I said carefully. Margaret's eyes welled with tears. It was a wake-up call. Thomas was so upset. He said he didn't want Jacob to grow up thinking it was okay to hurt people to get his way. And he's right. What kind of future would that lead to? We realized we've been enabling behavior that could harm Jacob's future, William admitted. Not to mention hurting Emma and other children in the process. The conversation flowed more easily after these initial admissions. We discussed practical steps for moving forward, how to handle future family gatherings, how to support both children through this transition, how to rebuild trust between all family members. We'd like to try a supervised play date, Margaret suggested tentatively. When you feel Emma is ready, of course. We could all be present. You, Robert, Thomas, Beth, and both of us. Just a short visit to start rebuilding. I considered this carefully. I think that could work as long as we're all on the same page about intervention if needed. Emma needs to see that all the adults will protect her if necessary. Absolutely, William agreed quickly. No more looking the other way or making excuses. We also discussed the family therapy session that had been scheduled for the following month. Both Margaret and William expressed nervousness about it, but confirmed their commitment to attending. It won't be easy, Margaret acknowledged. Talking about feelings isn't something our generation was encouraged to do. It's not always easy for our generation either, Robert said with a small smile. But it's worth it. As we prepared to leave, Margaret reached across the table and took my hand, an unprecedented gesture. Thank you for not giving up on us, she said quietly. You would have been justified in cutting us off after how we treated Emma. The fact that you're willing to work through this, it means everything. I squeezed her hand, feeling the first genuine connection we'd ever shared. Family is worth fighting for, I said. Even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. In the car on the way home, Robert was unusually quiet. Are you okay? I asked, reaching over to touch his arm. I'm trying to process everything, he admitted. I've spent my whole life believing I could never measure up to Thomas in my parents' eyes. That nothing I did was ever quite good enough. And now, suddenly, they're listening to us. Taking our concerns seriously. It's disorienting. Family dynamics can be incredibly powerful, I observed. They shape how we see ourselves and how we interact with the world. Changing those patterns isn't easy. No, he agreed. But necessary. He glanced at me. I'm proud of us. For standing firm, even when it was uncomfortable. For not accepting the status quo when it was hurting Emma. The following weekend, we attempted the supervised play date. We chose a public park with a playground, neutral territory where both children could have space if needed. Emma was nervous, but willing to try, especially after we assured her that all the adults would be watching closely and would step in immediately if any problems arose. Jacob arrived with Thomas and Beth, looking subdued. Beth had prepared him for the visit, explaining that he needed to be gentle and respectful. To everyone's surprise, it was Jacob who approached Emma first. I'm sorry I pushed you and took your robot, he said, clearly rehearsed, but seemingly sincere. Dr. Rodriguez is helping me learn to use my words instead of my hands when I'm upset. Emma regarded him cautiously. Okay, she said. Thank you for saying sorry. The children played separately at first, with Emma staying close to me while Jacob explored the climbing structure with Thomas nearby. Gradually, they began to interact in small ways, taking turns on the slide, playing an impromptu game of Simon Says That Beth initiated. There was one tense moment when Jacob wanted to use the swing Emma was on. His face darkened with frustration, and I saw him clench his fists at his sides. But before any adult could intervene, he took a deep breath and said, "Can I have a turn when you're done?" Emma nodded, and I exchanged a glance with Beth, who looked both relieved and proud. It was a small victory, but a significant one. As the playdate came to an end, Margaret approached me. This went better than I expected, she admitted. It's a process, I reminded her. There will be good days and difficult ones. The important thing is that we're all committed to making it work. She nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about something you said in your email, about how we might have been doing Jacob a disservice by excusing his behavior. I didn't want to see it then, but you were right. Children need boundaries to feel secure. William and I thought we were being loving by letting Jacob do whatever he wanted, but really, we were setting him up for failure. This insight surprised me. That's a profound realization, Margaret. Well, she said with a small smile, it turns out you can teach an old dog new tricks after all. On the drive home, Emma was thoughtful. Jacob seemed different today, she observed. How so? Robert asked. He used his words instead of grabbing or pushing. And he took turns without getting mad. She considered this for a moment. Do you think he's going to stay that way? It's going to take time and practice, I explained. Just like learning to ride a bike or read. He's learning new skills for managing his feelings and getting along with others. There might be times when he forgets or slips back into old habits. But it seems like he's trying, and that's a good start. Emma nodded, accepting this. I'm glad everyone's helping him learn. It's not fun to be around someone who hurts you. No, it's not, Robert agreed, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. And you never have to accept that from anyone. That evening, as we tucked Emma into bed, she asked a question that caught me off guard. Mom, why did Grandma and Grandpa let Jacob hurt me before? Didn't they love me? My heart ached at the confusion in her voice. I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. They do love you, sweetie. But sometimes adults can have wrong ideas about how children should behave or how to handle problems. They thought they were doing the right thing, even though they weren't. Like when I thought 7 plus 8 was 14 on my math test, she suggested. I was really sure I was right, but I was wrong. I smiled at her simple but profound analogy. Exactly like that. And just like you learned the correct answer was 15, Grandma and Grandpa are learning better ways to handle situations with you and Jacob. She seemed satisfied with this explanation, snuggling deeper under her covers. I'm glad they're learning. It feels better when grown-ups keep you safe. That's our job, Robert said, bending to kiss her forehead. And we'll always do our best to keep you safe and make sure you're treated with respect. As we closed Emma's door, Robert pulled me into a hug. We did good, he whispered. Standing up for her, pushing for change, not accepting the status quo. I leaned into his embrace, feeling the truth of his words. We did. And we'll keep doing it, one day at a time. 1 month after the incident that changed everything, our family landscape had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. The journey hadn't been smooth. There had been moments of backsliding, misunderstandings, and the occasional flare of old tensions. But the overall trajectory was undeniably positive. The first family therapy session had been challenging but productive. Our therapist, Dr. Martinez, had a gift for creating a safe space where everyone could express their feelings without judgment. William struggled the most, clearly uncomfortable with the vulnerability required, but even he had made important admissions about his tendency to dismiss emotional concerns as weakness. In my family, showing emotions was considered a failing, he explained during our second session. My father believed that men should be stoic and women should be accommodating. I see now how that limited perspective has affected my relationships with my sons and grandchildren. Margaret had surprised everyone by embracing the therapy process wholeheartedly. I've spent decades trying to maintain this image of a perfect family, she confessed. Always comparing us to others, always pushing for achievements that would make us look good. I never stopped to consider if we were actually happy. The supervised playdates between Emma and Jacob continued, gradually increasing in duration as Jacob demonstrated more consistent control over his impulses. There had been setbacks, a tense moment over a board game when Jacob thought Emma was cheating, a brief regression when Jacob was overtired and grabbed a toy from Emma's hands. But unlike before, these incidents were addressed immediately and appropriately by all the adults present. Jacob's therapy was making a difference. Dr. Rodriguez had diagnosed him with ADHD and some difficulty with emotional regulation, but assured Thomas and Beth that with proper support, Jacob could learn to manage his impulses effectively. They had implemented a consistent structure at home with clear expectations and consequences, which was helping Jacob feel more secure. "He's actually happier," Beth told me over coffee one afternoon. I was so afraid that setting firm boundaries would crush his spirit somehow. But he seems relieved to know exactly what the rules are and what happens if he breaks them. The unpredictability of our previous approach was actually making his behavior worse. Emma had blossomed over the past month. The wary, hesitant child who was always looking over her shoulder was being replaced by a more confident, expressive little girl. She still had moments of uncertainty around Jacob, but she was learning to speak up for herself in a way that made me incredibly proud. "Jacob, I don't want to play that game right now," I overheard her saying during a recent visit. "We can play what you want after I finish this drawing." This simple assertion would have been unthinkable a month ago, when Emma believed her wants and needs were less important than keeping the peace. Robert had grown too, finding his voice in his family in a way he never had before. He no longer defaulted to appeasing his parents or brother when conflicts arose. Instead, he stated his position calmly but firmly, maintaining boundaries while still showing love and respect. "I never realized how much energy I was expending trying to keep everyone happy," he told me one night. "Always walking on eggshells, always mediating, always compromising my own values to avoid rocking the boat. It's exhausting to live that way." "And now?" I asked. He smiled. "Now I'm just trying to do what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." It's actually much simpler. Our marriage had strengthened through this challenge. The united front we presented wasn't just for show. We had developed a deeper understanding of each other's values and priorities. We communicated more openly about difficult topics, no longer avoiding potential conflicts out of fear they might damage our relationship. The most profound transformation, however, was in the relationship between the generations. Margaret and William were making genuine efforts to connect with Emma on her terms, asking about her interests, listening to her stories, respecting her boundaries. They still occasionally slipped into old patterns of comparison or dismissiveness, but they caught themselves more quickly and made amends. Thomas and Beth had become unexpected allies in maintaining the new family dynamic. "We've been enabling toxic patterns for years," Thomas admitted during a conversation with Robert. "It was easier to go along with Mom and Dad's favorites game than to challenge it." I'm sorry for the role I played in that. Jacob and Emma were developing a cautious friendship based on their shared interests in space and drawing. It wasn't the instant cousin bond that Margaret had always envisioned, but it was authentic and developing at its own pace. During our most recent family dinner, now held at a restaurant to neutral territory, I watched Emma showing Jacob how to draw a rocket ship. He was listening attentively, occasionally asking questions, but never grabbing the pencil or trying to take over. It was a small moment, but it represented enormous growth for both children. "They're going to be okay, aren't they?" Margaret asked softly, following my gaze. "I think so," I replied. "Children are remarkably resilient when they have the right support." She nodded thoughtfully. "I've been reading that book you recommended about generational patterns. It's illuminating. So many things I did with my sons were exactly what my mother did with me, even though I promised myself I'd be different." "Awareness is the first step to change," I reminded her. "We can't transform patterns we don't recognize." "True," she agreed. "I just wish I'd realized sooner. Before the damage was done?" I suggested gently. She nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, it's never too late to heal relationships," I assured her. "Look at how far we've all come in just a month." Later that evening, as we prepared for bed, Robert brought up something that had been on my mind as well. "Do you think we would have reached this point if you hadn't sent that email? If you hadn't taken such a definitive stand?" I considered the question carefully. Honestly, no. I think we would have continued in the same dysfunctional pattern indefinitely. Everyone was too invested in maintaining the status quo, even though it was hurting all of us in different ways. Including Jacob, Robert noted. He was learning that he could hurt others without consequences. What kind of future would that have created for him? Exactly. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people we love is to hold them accountable, even when it's uncomfortable. He pulled me close. Thank you for having the courage to do that. For Emma, for all of us. As I drifted toward sleep, I reflected on the journey of the past month. The incident that had seemed so devastating at the time, finding Emma hurt and being dismissed by my in-laws, had ultimately become a catalyst for profound positive change. By refusing to accept the unacceptable, by standing firm in my boundaries, I had helped create space for healing and growth that benefited everyone, even those who initially resisted. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear. We would continue to navigate challenges as they arose, continue to work on communication and boundaries, continue to prioritize the well-being of all the children in our family. But the foundation had been laid for healthier relationships built on mutual respect rather than power dynamics or outdated expectations. I thought about Emma's words from earlier that day, spoken with the simple wisdom of a 7-year-old. It's better when everyone is kind, even when they disagree. Indeed it is. And sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to remind us of that fundamental truth. If you've ever had to stand up for your child against family pressure or set difficult boundaries with loved ones, I'd love to hear your experience in the comments. How did you navigate that challenging territory? What helped you stay strong when it would have been easier to back down? Remember to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share with someone who might need encouragement to hold firm in their own boundaries. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, protecting our children is always worth the discomfort of confrontation. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.